I bought my first house at the age of, how old was I? I was 32. Paid 140,000 Rand for it in Johannesburg, and I just plugged that 145,000 Rand into an inflation calculator. In 2026 values, that's about 1.25 million. And for that 145,000 Rand, I got a very large, beautiful old home with pressed steel ceilings and Oregon pine floors and doors and window frames and all of that sort of stuff, bay windows on a 500 square meter plot. What would I get for 1.3 million today? Nothing like that, that's for sure. That kind of home in the kind of suburb I bought it in, well, the way it was in terms of Joburg suburbs and their attractiveness, then, you'd be paying 7, 8, at least million for that kind of house on that kind of property in that kind of suburb. So I wasn't surprised when I read the new data from Lightstone property showing that while women and black South Africans are making up a growing share of young home buyers, the overall number of buyers under the age of 35 has declined significantly over the past 20 years. In South Africa, under 35s make up 37% of the population but own just 7% of residential property. Those of us who are over 50 own 68% of properties, despite representing only 29% of the population. Esteani Marx is the Business Development Executive at Lightstone. Hello, Esteani.
Hi, good day, John. Thanks for the opportunity to chat today.
In a way, sometimes we get data and go, that's weird. And sometimes we go, oh, yeah, that confirms the gut feel. Because I think everybody knows or has as part of their family, their immediate family, their extended family, their friendship circle, have people in their late 20s and early 30s who are still living at home or living in really quite not unpleasant, but not the sort of places they'd like to be living in because they simply can't afford to do anything else. So this backs that up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Agreed.
And the reasons are obvious, are they?
Sure. I think it is obvious if we look at, one of the main drivers being your affordability. I think affordability at the moment is definitely one of the dominant drivers for our younger generation not being able to actually, don't want to say they're not entering the property market, but they're not entering the property market when they would like to do so. It's rather entering the market when they're able to do so, which is a bit later than what we're used to see about 20 years ago.
But isn't it true throughout history where there have been property markets that younger people are underrepresented in terms of property market share versus population share, and older people who've had 20, 30, 40 years of work to grow a portfolio are overrepresented in the property share versus their percentage of the population?
Yes, I do think so. And there's also many reasons. I think, first of all, the cost of acquiring property, there is a significant cost to it. It's not only the deposit that you need to put down, but there's transfer fees, there's registration fees, there's, a lot of fees that actually do come with such a purchase. And I think that's one of the main drivers why young people don't necessarily just jump right into the purchasing of homes scenario, but rather takes a bit of time to start saving towards being able to entering the markets. And, it's almost like once you're in the market, it's easier to actually build up a portfolio because you are making equity available and you have the ability to purchase more properties. So I think that's the main reason why, the young generation typically takes longer to then access the market, and the older generation have more of a portfolio of properties that they're able to build up.
In Cape Town, it's a bigger issue than in other parts of the country, certainly in other metropolitan areas. And obviously there are towns and villages in the Western Cape and perhaps in other provinces as well, where the trend is for fairly significantly accelerating property prices. And obviously, there are large parts of Johannesburg where property prices are falling, stabilizing maybe, falling maybe, and there are villages and towns in sort of rural areas of other provinces where the same is true, where you struggle to sell a house because there are no buyers. But in a place where the trend is for increasing prices and that trend doesn't look likely to be interrupted, I mean, what around the world, what people are doing is they are getting together and they're buying a house, 3-4 of them, and then as the 3 or 4 of them get a little bit wealthier, then they buy out each other's shares. And so people are coming up with some innovative solutions. I mean, is anything like that happening in South Africa, or people just waiting and hoping?
I think, there is the what we call almost like a multi-family kind of living at the moment, where we see more and more, individual or families staying together for much longer. So not necessarily people purchasing together, but people almost supporting each other in a family environment for a little bit longer than what we used to. As we used to about 20 years ago that I entered the market, it was almost like your first paycheck directly goes towards the purchase of your first property. And that doesn't seem to be, what the younger generation today is aiming for. Instead, I think it's also, a change in lifestyle. So there's certainly a more towards, I don't want to say or call it a remote lifestyle, but the ability to move around more freely. Whereas also, if you have a property, you've purchased a property, you may very well be bound to a specific area. And 20 or 25 years ago, technology that we have today didn't exist, where people could actually communicate and transact across borders so easily. So people at today's day and age, they want to be free. They want to get up and go where they're needed from a career perspective. So yeah, I think the notion of renting rather than purchasing when you're young seems to be more of what people are or the young generation are leaning towards. And not only in South Africa, I think that also happens on an international forum, where it's the younger people would rather rent for a longer period of time and then enter the market. So not necessarily with others,
okay.
But yeah.
Esteani, thank you very much indeed for those insights. Esteani Marx, Business Development Executive at Lightstone.